I'm not sure. Because part of the payment I'm giving you is the fact that it's non-cumulative, has a higher rate to give you a risk compensation if I don't have money one year. That compensation is embedded into the effective dividend. And I would say that dividend is not SPPI. It's SPPI plus something else. I'll give you a little bit more, so you can't make me go bankrupt. So then I would say it doesn't meet the SPPI test. It's fair value to net income. Is that what you do? So does that make sense? So a non-cumulative preferred, in my view, doesn't meet the SPPI test because they're going to pay you money to take a risk component that is not time value of money. So therefore, I would say no. I think most of these issues, when you become really good in the standards, you could answer in the framework, right? Sorry, that? Yeah, if it's an embedded derivative, it's not the SPPI test. Fair value to net income. So if you have an embedded derivative, it depends on the derivative. If you have a loan that allows you to extend it, that embedded derivative is a little bit different. There's an exception for that. So if the loan says, I'll give you a 3-year loan with the option to renew for 3 years, 3 more years, that type of embedded derivative is probably okay for SPPI. But if the embedded derivative is a conversion feature or something else, then probably no. Probably no. So there's a list here of just various things. Inverse floaters, they're not so common, but I saw them at ADB where when interest rates go up, your rate goes down and vice versa. Project finance where there isn't sufficient collateral could also not meet the SPPI test. Because if it's what's the difference between project finance and corporate finance? So what's the difference between project and corporate finance? You got your CA, right? You used to know this. What's the difference?
Corporate financing is to corporate customers.
You think like a bank. No. From a company's point of view, what's the difference between project finance and corporate finance? Okay. Corporate finance means the company is liable for the debt. Right? So with corporate finance, it's usually going to meet the SPPI test. Project finance is where you set up an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. And if that entity fails, whoever loaned money to that entity cannot go to the sponsor. So there's no recourse. So if there is insufficient collateral on project finance, you charge a premium which doesn't relate to time value of money. It relates to the fact that you're taking risk of the project. So you can have project finance that fails the SPPI test. Is that very common here? You find project finance when you involve the World Bank or the ADB. So they sometimes, like for example in Cameroon and Chad, they set up an SPV to do the pipeline because no private investor would do it. It was going through some difficult areas, and to get oil to the ocean, they did this SPV so that when British Petroleum and Shell drilled oil, there was a way to get it to the markets. The oil companies put a little bit of money in, but their loss was restricted to their investment.
Even though the project financing is done here in Pakistan, but there are very less concept of SPV here. So normally companies don't go for SPVs.
Well, project finance means you have to have an SPV.
Here again, it's different.
Then it's not project finance.
It's taken in different understanding here.
Because project finance means the risk is ring-fenced. You have to have an SPV or it's not project finance. Maybe you use the term more casually, but in the sense, project finance means the risk is ring-fenced. Any other questions on SPPI? Yeah.
Specific to a particular product, could you analyze how with the credit card specifically, how would you either pass or fail the SPI test for credit card? Because they have that interest component, but it's contingent if the very typical case customer does not pay on time. So would that pass the SPPI test or would it fail the SPPI test?
Well, my instinct is credit cards would pass the SPPI test instinctively because credit cards are charging market rates of interest for the type of risk. So I haven't seen an example where the late fees on a credit card, because they're very high sometimes, would negate the fact that it's SPPI.
But in a typical case where, I mean, very immaterial amount, or let's say 0% is actually in the form of interest
Yeah.
that the bank is receiving from its credit card portfolio. So what is happening is every credit card customer is paying on time without any
Right.
late fee or the interest, API.
But-
Should be classified because bank is not earning any interest on that portfolio.
Because it's non-performing.
No, because performing
very
they're
well.
not delayed, the payments are not delayed, the bills are paid on time.
Yeah, but just because you don't have interest stated in the contract doesn't mean there's implicit interest. Just like with Islamic finance, there is no interest in the contract, but it's implicit from an IFRS perspective. So what you're saying to me is because the credit card bill is paid every month, there's no interest. Is that what you're saying?
How much I use, I just repay.
Whatever I am using is through my credit card. I am paying upfront to the bank in the form of cash.
Okay, I think,
If it will delay my payment, then I have to pay the interest amount on the outstanding.
well, if you don't use, if it fails the SPPI test, it's at fair value. I would argue because it's short term, fair value and amortized cost is the same. Because it's paid every month, right?
Yeah, but if we classify it as amortized cost, then what we have to do, we have to go for CAP,
The-
ICAP, and then we have to
To the ECL.
yeah, all those things for the modeling.
Well, when I've seen credit cards before, they classify them as
We do as the amortized.
amortized cost because there's a composite there. Some carry a balance and some don't.
Exactly. You cannot.
So what your question is, can I bifurcate my credit cards between those that carry a balance and those that don't? Is that your question? And I would say, why not? And if you bifurcate them between those that don't carry a balance, I don't think there's any difference between fair value and amortized cost because they pay it every month and it's such a short period of time that it would be irrelevant. So I don't think there would be any difference except maybe in the disclosure. So I would simply just treat them as amortized cost. But then you're saying,
They'll pass the SPPI test. Yes, they do.
yeah, because the contract doesn't say I have to charge you interest explicitly, it's implicit.
No, it's explicit. 39% APR is explicit.
Right, but it's also in the contract, if you pay every month by the payment date, it's 0.
Yeah.
But they make their money because the merchant pays a fee, right? That's interest. The merchant pays 2%.
Merchant fee all accounts for an EIR.
The merchant fee is your interest. So the payment you're getting there is the interest is up front from the merchant.
Why that will be an interest, from merchant? Why? Because it's his money that bank is blocking. They are actually charging service charges.
Yeah, but from
because
the...
of that facility that they are providing to the merchant.
Correct. So if I am the bank and you're Carrefour and you're the customer, basically I am going to give the customer a loan and simply you're going to pay the interest for them. You're going to pay the transaction fee,
Yeah.
the 2%. Or maybe it's more here in Pakistan. Is it more here?
No,
2. So you'll pay 2%. So if you charge 100 on the card, I'll give you 98. So the bank has interest of 2 for 1 month. It's interest.
For what?
For the bank to lend the money for the 45 days
To
to him.
him.
Bank charge the merchants the fees in terms of like
Yeah, that I know.
The
but
interest doesn't have to be charged to him. I could be charged to someone else. That doesn't mean it's not interest. So you would show the credit card. Do you show the credit card fees as interest? See, I would show the credit card fees as interest.
fees as the non-funded income.
No, that is not
included in
interest.
the EIR.
Why? Because in Pakistan you cannot charge interest if you have not provided anybody a loan or a facility. That's Article 28 of our Constitution.
Right. So if so you can charge them interest when they miss the first payment, right?
Till that time, you take the money when you charge the merchants. Till that time.
That's actually service fee, or you can say whatever.
It is part of it. In accounting, we see the substance over form. In legal form, it is a service fee, but in substance, it is basically interest which is charged.
No, even the merchant is getting their money like a month later.
Yeah.
Not
They don't get it the same day?
No.
Because the way it works in the U.S.
45
is the merchant gets the money the second with 2 days,
45 days.
T plus 2.
After 45 days.
So here, okay, your structure is different here. So the merchant is T plus 45, and the client is T plus 45 as well, right? Roughly. So there is no lending there. So this is a different model. Because in the U.S., the way it works is the merchant gets the money within 48 hours. So if you swipe, the money's in my bank account within 48 hours. So there is no lending in what you're saying. That's clear. It's a fee. But if the merchant gets the money within 48 hours and the client pays the money back 45 days later, that's a different scenario.
So the only loan event is when customer is defaulting and is
I
not
want-
paying on 45th day.
Well, it's not default. They're allowed to, right?
Oh yes, but that will convert into loan.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it a default. It's just a regular loan. Correct. Correct.
Sorry, I'm thinking, but when we saw the SPV example, so you said that in case of an SPV we had, so we have to, the SPPI test failed there.
Right.
You said that the SPPI test failed, like, because there is an additional premium in that,
For what? For which one? The credit cards?
the project finance example.
Because you're charging a fee for. I mean, I've seen this where the argument is that the project finance, you're charging extra fees that don't relate just to traditional credit risk. You're taking on excess risk.
There are just one or two examples.
Still a form of credit risk, isn't it?
Yeah, but if credit risk is really huge and the spread is really big, you could argue it's a form of equity risk. So, for example, if I give you a loan and you have, okay, if you have an asset of 100 and I give you a loan of 100, like in project finance, normally when you give a loan, you expect an element of equity, an equity buffer. So normally debt has an equity buffer that absorbs variability. So I'm saying if there is no equity buffer, you might consider in project finance that part of the cost is the equity buffer component, which is not really interest, which is a premium on top of that. That's the difference there. So in project finance, the equity buffer is not there. So you're paying someone else to take on the equity risk. Well, in traditional finance, you're not, because in corporate finance, the corporate has the risk.
Right. So in that case, SPPI test will fail straight away, and we have to.
It can. It depends. Look at the project. Look at the amount. I mean, it can fail if it's a highly leveraged project finance.
And highly leveraged is like, is there any interest?
Well, the question is the leverage so much that you're actually taking an equity risk, not a debt risk? This is subjective.
Yeah.
So if I lend money to finance your entire business, it's not really, there's an equity risk component there.
Right, but if it is 50-50,
That's different. 50-50, it's clearly not an equity risk.
okay.
So I'm talking about project finance where there's extreme amounts.
Right, okay.
Okay? Just one last point, and then we'll finish up. Staging, just a few slides ahead. This is one of the headaches, which I think here is more covered because it's set by the central bank, right? So the issue here with staging is we have to, in Europe, we have to come up as a bank, what is our policy between when something moves between stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and backwards. And normally when you do this, this requires a bit of work. Now, if it's stage 1 and 2, we calculate interest rate on the gross basis. If it's stage 3, it's on the net basis. So how we show it is going to be a little bit different here. So the thing is, stage 2, so when you go to stage 2, you give someone a concession. So you say you're having trouble, and if the concession can lead to the account becoming back to normal, and the cash flows are not detrimental, that could actually then go back to stage 1. And stage 3 is when you give someone a concession, like if I tell you I'm going to waive interest for 6 months. That's stage 3, because I'm saying I'm going to suffer a loss. If I'm saying I'm going to restructure your payments, but I'm not going to forgive any interest, I have a higher risk. That's stage 2, correct? So the issue here with staging is how we get our policies to go from stage 1 to stage 2 and backwards. So curing is when it gets better. So you might have some problems. For example, a bank I worked with in the UK, what they said is, after you make payments on time for 12 months, you'll go back to stage 1. So you could go from stage 1 to stage 2, back to stage 1. You could go from stage 2 to stage 3. The loan could be restructured. It could be a new loan. It could come back to stage 1. All of this requires lots and lots of documentation and systems work to make sure it's consistent. So I think we covered enough for today, right? Any other questions? So I've given you all my card, and if you ever want to, if you send me an email and you have questions, what I usually do is I usually respond with a voice clip because it's too much work to write out an email. So I send a voice clip, and if you want to send me a WhatsApp, my WhatsApp number, it's a Romanian number actually, is country code 40731. You send the message there. So I like getting questions because that's how I learn as well. As I said, these are new standards. There's going to be lots and lots of changes as the years go by, I'm sure. So I hope you learned a lot. 898, right? 898.